She walked in asking for a simple withdrawal. What she got was suspicion, condescension, and a test of dignity. But when the bank manager pushed too far, she didn't raise her voice. She revealed her identity. The woman they doubted was the CEO and founder of the very bank they worked for. And in that chilling moment of truth, everything changed. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The late afternoon sun spilled through the glass facade, casting long, amber beams across the polished marble floor. Lena Davis stepped inside the bank quietly, the soft echo of her footsteps the only announcement of her presence. It had been years since she last visited this particular branch, not because she didn't care for it, but because she had trusted it enough to run on its own. There was a gentle hum in the air, the quiet clicking of keyboards, the faint rustle of paper, the muffled voices of transactions in progress. Everything about the place felt familiar, yet distant, like returning to an old house where the wallpaper had changed, but the bones remained the same. Lena wore no makeup today, just a soft gray cardigan over a simple blouse, comfortable sneakers, and a calm expression. Nothing about her appearance spoke of power or position. That was intentional. She hadn't come here as the CEO of Davis Financial. Today she came as Lena, the woman who once mortgaged her home, pored over spreadsheets at midnight, and spent her weekends knocking on investors' doors to build a vision, brick by brick. This branch had been her first true victory. She had approved the land, the layout, the color of the chairs, even the artwork on the walls. She had stood in this very lobby on opening day, holding the ceremonial scissors with trembling hands and hope in her chest. The photograph from that day still sat in her office. A younger Lena in a blue suit, her smile bright with the kind of pride you only earn after weathering a storm. But the years had passed. Leadership expanded. Policies evolved. And Lena, like any founder, had learned to let go, just enough to watch her creation grow. She trusted her team. She believed in the systems. And she believed in the values that had brought her here: fairness, dignity, and service without judgment. Still, something had called her back today. Not a board meeting, not a quarterly review, just a simple personal withdrawal. Nothing more. And yet, in her heart, it felt like more. Perhaps it was intuition, or perhaps she needed to be reminded of what it meant to be a customer again, to stand on the other side of the counter and feel what others felt. She took a deep breath as she approached the front desk. The cool air inside the bank kissed her skin, carrying with it 100 memories. She wasn't expecting applause or recognition. She didn't want special treatment. What she wanted was simpler and perhaps more difficult to find. She wanted to be treated fairly, just like anyone else. And in that quiet desire lay the first ripple of what was about to unfold. The young teller behind the counter didn't look up when Lena approached. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. Lena waited politely for a greeting. One didn't come. She cleared her throat gently. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal," she said, her tone even. Without lifting her gaze, the teller slid a clipboard across the counter. "Please fill this out," she said flatly, as if reciting lines she'd repeated too often to care. Lena glanced at the form: name, account number, withdrawal amount. Simple enough. She picked up the pen and wrote, "Lena Davis, personal checking, $5,000. It wasn't a significant amount, not for her, not for most banks, but it was enough to require identification, which she offered along with the completed form. That was when it began. The teller, her name tag read Sophie, finally looked at her. Not fully, just a glance, brief and searching, as if trying to find something that didn't quite fit. Her gaze dipped to Lena's ID, then darted back to her face. Something flickered behind her eyes. A pause. "Could you hold on a second?" Sophie said, her voice uncertain now. Without waiting for a response, she took Lena's ID and disappeared behind a frosted glass door. The gesture was swift, almost anxious. Lena remained still, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the marble counter. She had stood at this very spot before, years ago when she greeted the first customers. Back then, she had trained the staff herself. Smiles were mandatory, empathy encouraged. Now she was being looked at with suspicion. No explanation, no courtesy. She watched the seconds tick by on the small digital clock near the lobby entrance. She remembered her father once telling her that the most dangerous kind of disrespect was the kind delivered with a smile, or worse, with silence. The door opened and Sophie re-emerged, followed by a man in a navy blazer and polished shoes. Brad Sullivan, the branch manager. Lena recognized him from the staff file, though they had never met in person. He was younger than she expected, with neat hair and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, Miss Davis," he said. "I understand you're making a withdrawal." Lena nodded. "Yes, 5,000 from my personal account." Brad took the form, examined it slowly. "May I see your ID again?" "I already gave it to Sophie," she said, her voice calm but edged. He held it up to the light, turning it over as if inspecting for forgery. Lena resisted the urge to sigh. This wasn't a border crossing. It was her bank. "And what do you do for work, Miss Davis?" Brad asked casually. Too casually. Her jaw tensed. She gave the same answer she had given countless times in interviews, board meetings, and investor briefings. "I run a bank." Brad blinked, then nodded as if he hadn't quite heard her. "Is this a personal account or a business one?" "It's written on the form," Lena replied, her voice growing cool. Brad didn't answer. He turned the form over in his hand again, then glanced at Sophie, who stood behind him like a shadow. The girl's eyes shifted between them, anxious. She hadn't said a word. The silence between them grew heavier, like a room with the air pulled out of it. Lena had felt this before. In boardrooms where her opinions were met with, "We'll circle back." In investor meetings where men with thinner resumes spoke over her with louder voices. But never like this. Never here. Not in her own bank. "I'll need to ask you a few more questions before we proceed," Brad said, his tone smooth, official. Lena didn't move. "Such as?" Brad tilted his head, considering. "Just to clarify, this is your first time banking with us?" She blinked. "No," she said evenly. "I've banked here since this branch opened. I was at the ribbon cutting." Still, he nodded slowly, as if her words didn't quite register. "And you're withdrawing $5,000? He repeated as if the number itself warranted suspicion. "Can you tell me what you do for work again?" Her fingers curled gently against the counter. She could hear the forced civility in his voice, but beneath it was something else. Not procedure, not policy, assumption. "I run a bank," she said again, firmer this time. "The same bank you work for." Sophie flinched slightly at the remark, but Brad pressed on. "What kind of bank?" The question sat there, tasteless and tone-deaf. Lena took a breath and held it, searching his face for any sign of recognition. She found none. This was no longer about the money. It was about being made to prove she belonged, a test no one else in the room was being asked to take. Brad turned the form over again, his fingers tracing the edge like it might reveal a secret. Lena watched him, her expression unreadable. There was no reason for this, no cause, no rationale, just doubt, unfounded and unnecessary. She didn't yell. She didn't storm off. That wasn't her way. Instead, she stood a little straighter and remembered who she was and how many times she'd had to remind people. Brad's fingers hovered over the edge of the clipboard as though the form might offer some hidden truth he had missed. He didn't look at Lena directly anymore. His eyes danced around her, landing on her shoulders, her hands never quite meeting her gaze. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. "I'm going to need to verify some additional information before we proceed," he said. Lena's brow lifted. "Additional information?" "You understand, it's just policy. For amounts over a certain threshold—" "5,000?" she asked, her tone flat. Brad cleared his throat. "Sometimes we ask for a recent deposit amount. Just a routine question." Lena looked at him quietly for a moment. Her voice was soft when she spoke, but unmistakably pointed. "Do you ask that of everyone, Brad?" His expression flickered. "It depends." "On what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at Sophie, who pretended to adjust something on the terminal screen. Lena's fingers rested lightly on the counter, but her spine straightened. The quiet weight of injustice was becoming heavier now. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. I don't carry deposit figures in my memory, she said, but you have my account number. You have my ID. You can look it up. Brad nodded once, slowly, but still he made no move to do so. We take security very seriously, Miss Davis, he said. Lena's lips curved slightly, though there was no humor in it. Security or assumption? His eyes snapped back to hers for the first time, and for a moment, silence bloomed between them. You've seen my ID, Lena continued. You have all the documentation you need, and yet you've paused. You've hesitated. You've second-guessed. Why? Brad opened his mouth, but no words came. Because I'm not wearing a suit, she offered gently. Because I don't look like someone who belongs behind that glass door? Brad shifted. It's not personal. But it is, Lena said, her voice still calm. It became personal the moment you stopped treating me like a customer and started treating me like a question. There was a stillness in the room now. A few heads turned from their chairs. The security guard by the front door took a half-step closer, uncertain. Lena saw it all, noted every gesture. She wasn't angry, not in the way people usually imagined anger. This wasn't rage, it was recognition. This bank, she said, her voice lower, was built on a promise that everyone would be treated with respect, that fairness wasn't conditional on appearance. Brad swallowed. You're making me prove I belong here, Lena continued, even though I stood in this lobby on the day it opened, even though I helped write the policy you're misquoting to justify your discomfort. Sophie's hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. She wasn't typing. Brad took a breath, but Lena stepped in before he could speak. You know what's strange? She said. I didn't come here today to check up on anyone. I didn't come to inspect or audit. I came to feel like a customer again, to remember what this place is supposed to be. Her voice softened, but the steel in her words remained. And what I've found, Brad, is that even here, in a building I helped raise from blueprint to cornerstone, I'm still not seen. Brad was silent. Sophie stared down at the counter. Then Lena said something that made the entire room still. Tell me, Brad, if I were a man in a blazer or a woman in pearls, would we be having this conversation? Brad's jaw tensed. You're making this more difficult than it has to be. No, Brad, Lena said, her tone firm. I'm holding you accountable for making it more difficult than it should have been. For the first time, Brad looked uncertain. He glanced toward the entrance, perhaps hoping this would all dissolve, but Lena's voice brought him back. You're standing between me and my own money, not because you're following rules, but because you're afraid to trust what you see. You've decided I don't fit, and now you're trying to justify that decision instead of correcting it. Her eyes didn't waver. Do you understand how many people walk into banks and face this? People with valid IDs, valid accounts, valid lives, who are met with scrutiny before service? Brad said nothing. Now imagine, she added quietly, how they feel without the title I carry. Brad shifted again, hands tightening on the clipboard. The weight of the room had changed. He knew it. Lena took a final breath, steady and deep. I won't raise my voice, she said. I won't make a scene, but I won't forget this either, and neither will anyone who saw it happen. She stepped back half a pace, giving him space, giving him the final moment to choose. What he did next would say everything. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, even the low hum of printers and muffled conversations in the background seemed to pause. Brad stood behind the counter, clipboard clutched in his hands, his lips slightly parted but with no words to fill the space between them. Lena didn't move. She had said what needed saying, not to win an argument, but to lay bare what had been silently practiced in 100 small ways by people like Brad, in buildings like this. But now it was time. She reached calmly into her leather tote, the kind worn smooth by years of use, not trend, and pulled out her phone. With one fluid motion, she tapped the screen and began recording. She didn't raise her voice. Her tone was even, cool, and impossibly clear. You're refusing to let me access my own account, she said, the camera trained directly on Brad. Despite valid identification, despite proper documentation, despite following every procedure this bank claims to uphold. Brad took a half step back, caught off guard by the shift. He glanced over at Sophie, who had frozen mid-keystroke. The tension was no longer building, it was exposed. And you, Lena continued, turning the camera briefly to the nearby security guard, you were summoned. For what exactly? The guard hesitated. I was just asked to stand by. Make sure things went smoothly. Smoothly, Lena echoed. Her eyes returned to Brad. Is that what this looks like to you? No one answered. They didn't need to. Lena lowered the phone, but she didn't put it away. She let the silence breathe, let it settle on every corner of the room like dust in morning light. The other customers were watching now, pretending not to, but unable to look away. And then, finally, she stepped forward, not with anger, not with vengeance, with clarity. You keep asking me who I am, she said quietly, her gaze locked onto Brad's. So let me answer in full. She picked up her ID from where it had been left, carelessly on the counter. She turned it slowly, deliberately, letting the embossed letters catch the light. Lena Davis. Her fingers tapped gently on the name. I built this. I founded Davis Financial. I signed the papers that allowed this branch to exist. I chose the layout of this lobby. I signed the budget that gave you, Brad, your first paycheck here. Brad's face lost what little color remained. His hand trembled slightly at the edge of the desk, as if trying to find something solid to hold on to. I hired the team that trained you, Lena said, her voice unwavering. I approved the policy manual you just quoted, and I did it all because I believed in something bigger than myself. She took a breath, measured, steady. I believe people deserved a place where they didn't have to prove their worth to be treated with dignity. Repetition, slow and intentional. I built this. I hired you. I trusted this place. Brad swallowed hard, his clipboard lowered, forgotten at his side. I came here today not to be recognized, Lena continued, not to make anyone nervous. I came because I wanted to believe this place still honored the values we claim to hold. She looked around, not just at Brad and Sophie, but at the others. The woman seated in the waiting area, the older man by the ATM, even the security guard, whose posture now softened with a realization that went deeper than duty. And yet, she said, what I found was a mirror, a reflection of a culture that still questions someone's presence when it doesn't match their assumptions. The weight of her words didn't rise. It deepened. I've seen this kind of treatment before, but never here, not in a place with my name on the wall. There was no thunder in her voice, no theatrics, only truth, clean, unshakable. Lena finally turned back to Brad, her expression unreadable. You had a choice today, a chance to treat someone fairly without needing a reason to, and you failed that test, not because you didn't know better, but because you chose not to see. She paused, allowing the words to linger. I don't need your apology. I need your awareness. And with that, she slid the clipboard gently back across the counter, untouched, unneeded. She didn't look back as she turned toward the exit, her steps measured and composed. But before reaching the door, she stopped. Without turning, she said one last thing. I won't forget today, Brad, and I assure you, neither will this bank. Then she walked out, not as a customer, not even as a CEO, but as a woman who remembered her worth long before anyone else did. The next morning, Lena stood at the head of the conference table in the executive boardroom, sunlight pouring in behind her through tall windows that overlooked the city she once walked through with resumes in hand. This time there were no marble counters or security guards, no assumptions, just silence and attention. Every branch manager was there, department heads, compliance officers, people she had trusted and would trust again, but not without change. I'm not here to relive what happened yesterday, she began, her voice even. I'm here to talk about what happens next. The room remained still, pens unmoving, eyes fixed. What happened at that branch wasn't about me, she continued. It was about culture, a quiet culture, one that doesn't show up in memos or policies, but in tone, in posture, in how quickly or slowly we trust. She let that land. It's not enough to say we believe in fairness. We have to build fairness into our daily behavior, into the habits we train, the language we permit, and the leadership we reward. There was no anger in her voice, only purpose. That week, Lena implemented a full audit of frontline interactions across every branch. She called for a rewrite of customer service protocols, not from a policy book, but from the lived experiences of real customers. And she mandated unconscious bias training, not just as a formality, but as a framework for accountability. Brad was quietly removed from his position. Sophie, though shaken, was offered coaching and a second chance. Not everyone needed to be punished, but everyone needed to be awakened. Lena didn't want fear, she wanted growth. In the months that followed, something changed, not just in procedures, but in spirit. Employees began to pause before judging, to listen before deciding. The lobby of the very branch where it all unfolded was redesigned. Open seating, a new mural, and a plaque with Davis Financial's founding values etched in bronze. Access, respect, dignity. Lena would visit again, but not in disguise. She would walk through the front doors not to test, but to teach, not to be recognized, but to remind. That respect is not earned by appearance. That fairness is not given, it is chosen. And that leadership isn't proven in the moment of triumph, but in the moment you decide what kind of legacy you're willing to leave behind. She had built the bank, but now she was rebuilding the heart inside it. We all carry the power to shape the spaces we walk through, whether we're at the counter or behind it. The world doesn't change because we raise our voice. It changes because we refuse to stay silent when respect is withheld. What kind of legacy will you leave behind? In a world that often judges by appearances before character, stories like Lena's are a powerful reminder that dignity must never be conditional. This isn't just one woman's journey. It's a reflection of countless emotional stories that go unheard, especially those of Black women who carry strength, grace, and resilience through every quiet battle. At Unraveled Fates, we believe the most powerful moments come not from revenge, but from reform, from the quiet courage to demand better and to lead change with compassion. These narrated stories are more than entertainment. They're calls to awareness, empathy, and justice. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it. Let others witness what quiet strength looks like. Let them see that change begins when someone dares to say, "This isn't right, and I won't stay silent." Because behind every policy is a person, behind every moment of bias is a chance to build something better, and behind every silent witness is someone waiting for the courage to speak. Share this story. Start a conversation. Let it be more than a moment. Let it be a movement.